I'm Gary Bembridge. This is another of my cruising tips for travelers. I want to take a look at why cash refunds and the allocation of future cruise credits is taking so long, and some of the things that you can do to make things go quicker, easier, and reduce a lot of the stress. So let's take a look at 5 things that you need to really know about why refunds are taking so long. The first and most obvious of them is volume. If you consider there's around about 600,000 people on cruise ships every single week of the year when they're sailing. So that's, let's assume most people travel as a couple, that's around about 300,000 bookings. What the cruise lines are telling us is between sort of 40% and 50% of cruises are asking for cash refunds. So that's around 150,000 bookings every single week that is cancelled that have to be processed. So if you consider cruise lines are cancelling roughly about a month of cruises at a time, that means there's up to 500,000 of cash refunds that need to be processed. So the volume is absolutely enormous, and that of course takes a lot of time to work through, process and raise the refund, which then gets charged back to your credit card. The second thing though that's also creating a huge amount of work is, even if you take the future cruise credit option, in many cases and for most cruise lines there's also another refund that has to happen. So you'll find, for example, you get port fees will be refunded in cash, or if you've done things like you bought Wi-Fi in advance, paid gratuities in advance, drinks packages, excursions, or you've bought any other kind of things like that, those are cash refunded. So even if you're taking future cruise credit, someone has to work through and cash refund all those elements that you get cash refunds for. So if you take, for example, a couple of my experiences. So for example, I had a Royal Caribbean cruise cancelled. I decided to take the cash, but I actually got back 6 different refunds, which of course cover the fare, the gratuities. So that meant for that actual one booking, there were 6 actual transactions that had to be processed. So the volume is absolutely enormous. The third thing to note is that the cruise lines themselves are reducing the number of staff. So a lot of people have been laid off or furloughed, and some of them are working shorter hours, and most of the call center people, because of social distancing and lockdowns, are working from home. So they're actually working with less resources out of the office. So for them it's a much more complicated process because it's reliant on the hours they can work, the time they can work, the situation at home, connections to Wi-Fi, etc., etc. So actually their whole process is not as simple and easy. You've got this huge big volume and you've got people trying to cope with just the volume to be processed. The fourth thing to understand is that when they cancel, they're cancelling 5 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever at a time. So they're generating millions of transactions that have to be processed. And what they're then doing is they're tending to work through them first come, first served, or cruise by cruise. So depending on the cruise line, some of them are saying what they'll do is they'll work through cancellations in the date order that cruises come. So if your cruise happened to be at the end of that batch that's cancelled, you're probably going to be at the end that they start processing. Some of the cruise lines are doing it slightly differently. It's based on the order that they get the request. But there is a sequencing process that will of course add more time to the whole process of getting your refund. The fifth, and one of the things that concerns people perhaps the most, is of course the cruise lines are managing cash. Cruise lines have a big cash flow issue. They are not getting any revenue in, or getting very limited revenue in, but have huge costs going out. So we know that it costs between $100 million and $150 million per ship to keep that ticking over. Now they've gone into cold layup, which means they've reduced the costs quite significantly, but they are spending literally billions every single month to keep things ticking over. At the same time, they then have to have the cash flow going out for refunds. So without a shadow of a doubt, there will be some cash flow management going on to keep the way of just cash draining out of the system much more manageable. The cruise lines are bringing a lot of money in, billions of dollars in, to help tie them over, but they are going to be managing cash, which is why you'll hear things like some of the cruise lines saying it's going to take 90 days, a combination of the volume, staff just being able to cope with it, and also to manage the cash. So what are the 5 things that I think you should do to try and make this process less stressful, easier, and hopefully speed up the whole process of getting a refund? Well, first of all, and absolutely really importantly, is keep up to date with your specific cruise lines, rules, regulations, and processes. As this has been going on, the rules and regulations have changed, the time frames have changed, the percentage that they're giving you incentives in terms of future cruise credits have been tweaked over time. So make sure you really understand what the current terms and conditions are, particularly if you're waiting for a cruise to be cancelled. So for example, I've had 5 cruises cancelled so far. I have 2 more that I'm expecting. And so I'm keeping an eye on those 2 cruise lines to understand what they're currently doing, what the rules are. Are they automatically refunding future cruise credit? Are they giving a specific window of time where I'm going to have to apply? And what are the actual regulations and rules and expiry dates? So make sure that you absolutely understand for your cruise line what the rules and regulations are, so you know when your cruise gets cancelled, or as your cruise gets cancelled, which option is going to work best for you and which process you want to go with. Personally, I'm taking mostly cash refunds because I have so many cruises. As I've already mentioned, I've had all those cruises cancelled. I have a whole bunch for the rest of the year. So I actually want to have the cash to maintain flexibility as I look at next year. I don't want all the future cruise credits piling up and locking me into having to go a certain route. So that is my second point. You need to decide, do you want the future cruise credit or do you want the cash? Now I've told you why I'm taking cash. Why should you consider taking future cruise credit? Well, if you know already that you're going to be booking on that cruise line immediately that you get your future cruise credit, then of course take the future cruise credit because you're going to get that bonus and then you can go straight in and use that to make your next booking. Generally speaking, the future cruise credits are coming through really, really quickly for most cruise lines. The third really important thing, and this is something that I've found has worked quite well for me, is diarize everything. So when you know that your cruise is cancelled, diarize some specific dates. So for example, using the Norwegian Cruise Line example again, is they were going to give a very specific window of time when they would open to make the claim. Now that was like 2 weeks ahead of once they announced the cruises were being cancelled. So I put in my diary, when I got up that morning, I logged on, it was available to make the claim and I put the claim in. Hopefully that would mean that I'm at the beginning of the queue for processing. So make sure you know the exact date, particularly if you have a window of time where you have to do something. Some of them then also give you an expiry date. So you have to have submitted a claim by a certain date. So make sure you understand when that is. Diarize when you should be getting that refund. So for example, I'd put in my diary all the dates that I should have a refund, the latest date. So that just reminds me at what point I can start chasing. In that way, although it does mean you're waiting for a long time, it takes out some of the stress. So instead of me checking every day in my bank, have I got the refund, have I got the refund, I knew that I had a certain date to check, and it certainly took a lot of stress out of the process. The good news is that I've found so far all the cruise lines that I've had cancelled, I've actually been paid before that date has come up. If you do take future cruise credit, make sure that you've put in your diary when it expires, and perhaps have little reminders every couple of months if you haven't decided what to do, so you don't let those future cruise credits expire. My next point is be kind, especially to the cruise line agents that you may be talking to, emailing with, communicating with. This is a very stressful and difficult time for everybody. Bear in mind the cruise lines are under enormous pressure. Lots of their colleagues have been laid off, furloughed. There's a lot of uncertainty. It's a very stressful and difficult time for them. They have a lot of work on their plate, and actually getting really angry and difficult with them is not actually going to help. Be firm, be kind, and I think you generally find that people are responding really well to that. So hopefully you've understood a little bit why they're taking so long to process through. It's probably less of a conspiracy and much more just of a pure logistics and challenging time that cruise lines have to deal with. I have loads more videos packed full of tips and advice about all things cruising, so why don't you watch another one of those right now?